And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Countdown to Election Day. A week from this moment, we may know. We may have a definitive answer if everyone shows up to the polls. Everyone gets their ballot in. No more mail. Don't send any ballots through the mail from this moment forward. Drive yourself to the election office, drop it in the box, or hold on to it and go to the polling place and turn it in and say, I want to vote. I want to vote in the machine. This is where we are at this moment. Do not put anything in the mail, because the Republicans are already spinning their magic for what I fear is coming. We're going to talk a lot about that tonight, but our quote of the day takes me back. It's been years since I've read the Federalist Papers, but is it vain to say that enlightened statesmen will be able to adjust these clashing interests and render all subservient to the public good? Enlightened statesmen will not always be at the helm. And here we are in a moment where we clearly do not have enlightened statesmen who are able to, separate their personal gain, separate their ideological gain, their faction from the rest of what's good for society, for the good of the rest of us. And all because they have the power. And this is, what the founders, they predicted factions would be the destruction of this country. And, it's been years since I've read Federalist 10, but Madison was right. But we're in a weird moment, man, where we're in our camps. And the idea that he talked about, as I remember, was that, as long as the factions are small and the populace still consents to the government, and the government still reacts to the consent of the governed, we could get through all of the factions. Let the passions rage of the people. Let the fire burn. He used the analogy of the fire, of air and fire. But we're in this moment where the minority we're now seeing the tyranny of the minority. The Republicans clearly the minority in this country, and the system is set up in a way to, benefit them at this moment. We now have 4 Supreme Court justices that were put on the court by people who lost the popular vote. Now, think about this. We don't have all of the people to vote. Nobody's in this country's got the majority of vote, so they don't even really have the consent of the governed. And now you've got the 4 of the 5 conservative justices, or corporatist justices, as I call them, appointed by people who didn't win the popular vote. Scary, scary times. But yesterday it was done. Amy Coney Barrett is the 115th Supreme Court justice to sit on the court. 52-48 vote. Only Susan Collins, the only Republican, Susan Collins, to vote against Barrett, because guess what? She's up for re-election. And the people of Maine, and again, you remember what Republicans said in 2016? We should let the voters decide. Susan Collins, the one who puts her finger in the wind, she read the tea leaves in her state. Her constituents were saying no. And she voted against it. She didn't vote against it because, any ideological reason. She voted against it because it's a political year. Her constituents held her feet to the fire. So going to be interesting to see how this plays itself out, especially right now, because Amy Coney Barrett could be seated on the court at this minute, as the Republicans here in Pennsylvania are in a fevered pitch to overturn what the Supreme Court said just last week, which was that the votes should be counted. The U.S. Supreme Court deferred to the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, who said that we got to count the ballots. So if a mail-in ballot comes and it's postmarked the day of, and I'm telling you right now, do not send your ballot in the mail. Don't do it. You're setting yourself up. We're setting this up for them to be able to have thrown out. Take it to the election office or take the ballot to your polling place and turn it in and vote on election day. Do not put it in the mail. But the state Supreme Court said if it's in the mail, it's postmarked the day of November 3rd. You got 3 days till after, and then it will be counted. It will be counted, which is the complete opposite of what they ruled on yesterday in Wisconsin. So, again, you got to really think about what our Supreme Court is doing. Now, I said right when the case happened in Pennsylvania, this isn't final. I do believe that it will rear its ugly head, and Republicans here have already filed a suit. They're already pursuing an expedited path back to the Supreme Court to relitigate what was already decided. And with Amy Coney Barrett on the court, that could provide the fifth vote to undo what the Supreme Court had allowed, which was to let the state court, which is what they always do, defer to the state court. And our state Supreme Court said, no, we're going to count the ballots. And I think this is a huge message. I think this is one of those moments for my truly conservative friends, because I got to stop using conservative for the court, because they're not. They're corporatist. Conservatives want to, conserve. They believe in institution. They believe in not radical change. We are about to embark on some fairly radical changes very soon, I believe. And I know there are those who said, no, Rick, these people aren't, they're thoughtful and they're not ideological. They're good, decent, legal scholars. And I said, yeah, okay, I may have possibly been naive at around 6 or 7 years old to believe that. I don't now, and I haven't since about 6 or 7, I think. Everyone has their agenda, and we saw that play out in the Janus decision, to where the ideological right of the court said, no, we're going to make the entire nation a right-to-work nation for public sector workers, undoing decades of decided law. So the era of decided law, I'm telling you right now, I believe is over. The idea of stare decisis and precedent is now over. I think we're going to see a lot more decisions just coming out of thin air, made out of whole cloth, of going, you know what, we're going a different direction now. Why? As Mitch McConnell said yesterday, we have the power. And I think that's the important part. And look, there are people who already see this coming. Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, already filed a motion of recusal, asking Amy Coney Barrett to recuse herself from any case having to do with the mail ballot extension, because they already see this coming. And look, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a legal scholar. I don't even pretend to be. This is common sense. You know what criminals are going to do. You know what they know they've got control. They know they can abuse power, because understand, absolute power corrupts absolutely. We know that. And this is one of those moments. And one of those moments that we should be quite concerned about. It got me thinking today, because we're in this weird moment that we as a country are so badly divided. And I had a conversation with a really good friend who's equally concerned. Someone who I consider a lot more learned than I am with legal issues. And he confirmed all of my great concerns. I fear, voting rights, we're going to see those right away. You're going to see those destroyed almost immediately, I believe. But more importantly, the other stuff, the pendulum swinging further to the side of corporate power, the original intent idea of protection of property, protection of wealth, which takes me back to what we're going to see on labor rights, on civil rights, on consumer rights, on women's rights. You go down the list, LGBTQ rights, you're going to see the pendulum continue to swing. And I think in a much faster fashion than has been. But as a working person, and I've talked about this before, I see us moving back to the days of the Lochner era, where if you were hungry enough and desperate enough, and your kids were starving, and you're on the verge of homelessness, and you were willing to work for really desperate poverty wages in deplorable conditions, there's no law that they're going to allow to stand to stop you from doing that, to protect you from being in that environment. In fact, I think they're going to take us back to the days that encouraged that kind of behavior. We're going to see the destruction of the ability of labor unions to exist, which is so bizarre to me that Trump and the Republicans have such strong labor support among some in the membership. Now, is it all of the underlying things, the racism, the guns, the abortion? Yes, absolutely. But it's moving us back towards an era of the original intent of this country. And when they talk about their original intent, generally it's only what's written in the Constitution, but it's what they meant from the beginning, to protect the powerful and the wealthy from the unwashed masses, from you and me, and to be able to to crush the factions. I mean, Madison wrote in 10 about factions being the the downfall of the country, and we're witnessing this because we're now in two really big camps. But he wrote, liberty is to faction what air is to fire. And I agree. We need to have liberty. We need to have our ability to say our voice, to vote and to participate. And when that is being silenced, as the Republicans here in Pennsylvania are trying desperately to do, as the Republicans in Wisconsin were able to use the U.S. Supreme Court to do to the folks there, I have a problem with that. And I think we will as well. I think we will. And I think we will have this, regardless of what happens. I think there's going to be major trouble unless it's a landslide. Now we've had Joe Walsh, I would throw him in the much more libertarian than conservative category, but the former congressman from Illinois who came on and said, look, he said, I believe it's going to be a landslide. I believe Joe Biden's going to be elected. It'll be 9:00 and we can go to bed early because we're going to know. I hope he's right. I hope we're able to right the ship with a mandate of people who have come and said, this is too much, this is too far. Because my fear gets into what happens if this ends up in front of the Supreme Court again. Do we have another moment like Florida? Is Pennsylvania the new Florida? Is this the place where, sad reality, you have the Boogaloo Boys, much like the Brooks Brothers riot you had down in Florida? Do you have them showing up at elections office, only this time armed to the teeth? What if it's Michigan? Do you have the militias showing up at the elections office, armed in their full military attire? The Secretary of State there in Michigan, Jocelyn Benson, she issued an order that would ban open carry at the polling places because we don't want to intimidate voters at the polling places. And immediately the police said, we can't enforce this. We can't enforce this at all because the gun problem has gotten so far out of hand that these militias have taken over so much of that state that they can't enforce it. They can't enforce the rule of law. The faction has taken over. And what is that going to mean for the rest? And the weird thing is, the majority it's one of these moments where, and like I said, I hope Joe Walsh is right. I hope that it's a landslide election, one way or another. If Donald Trump wins the popular vote and he wins, without the cheating that I expect that has to happen for him to win, then he's the president. Then we have to deal with what comes with that. That is the will of the people. That's our system. You then fight like hell against the policies they're going to try and enact. But I fear this comes back to 2000. And only now the more extreme thought puts us into this world of the Supreme Court putting their thumb even heavier on the scale and not counting those ballots. Because at the end of the day, and this is where, having conversations with Republicans, and I've been doing that a lot these last couple of weeks, everybody agrees we want the votes counted. Everyone agrees we should be able to cast our ballot. We should be able to vote. That's the foundation of this constitutionally limited democratic republic. That is the basis of the consent of the governed. And what I see in every direction is the sanctity of that ballot box being torn apart. I see Donald Trump constantly saying that if I lose, the election's rigged. And look, the polling's all against him in every direction. But he's already setting this up. If I lose, it's because it was stolen from me. I haven't heard Joe Biden say that yet. But what if the Supreme Court at the last minute steps in and goes, you know what, Pennsylvania? Those ballots that showed up on the day after the election that was postmarked the day before, or the day before, those are invalid. Sorry, you can't count them. And because, here's the thing. Who is voting early? Who is mailing in those ballots? That's always the question. And overwhelmingly, we already know. It's not Republicans. It's not the Trumpkins. In fact, the Trumpkins have defiantly told me that they're showing up on Election Day. They're going to bring their coronavirus with them. So I'm telling you right now, if you haven't voted yet, by all means, do not put the ballot in the mail. Take it to your local elections office, find a drop location, drop it there. Do not put it in a mailbox. And if you can't find a drop location, then show up to your polling place, hand it in, and cast your ballot. That is the way forward for me. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1933. That was the day Detroit anarchist labor leader Joseph Labate died. Born in Paw Paw in 1850, Joe was born to descendants of French immigrants and grew up among native Potawatomi peoples in southwest Michigan. He became a printer, joining the local typographical union number 18, and worked for the Detroit Post and Tribune. He was an early leader of the Socialist Labor Party. By 1878, Joe organized the first Knights of Labor Assembly in Detroit. He served as the first president of the Detroit Trades Council and founded the Michigan Federation of Labor. He wrote tirelessly for a number of labor and socialist newspapers across the country. He embraced anarchism and soon produced a popular column titled Cranky Notions. Labate enjoyed the company and correspondence of radical labor leaders like Emma Goldman, Albert and Lucy Parsons, Eugene V. Debs, Benjamin Tucker, Terence Powderly, and others of the progressive era. He was often referred to as the gentle anarchist for his insistence on nonviolence and distancing from those anarchists who advocated the use of violence as an acceptable tactic. Labate was also known to never throw out any printed material relevant to labor or radical causes. His biographer, Carletta Anderson, notes that the story of his life, deeds, and thoughts is abundantly revealed through the treasure trove of letters, periodicals, clippings, manuscripts, booklets, photos, and circulars once stored in his attic and now housed in the Labate collection of the University of Michigan. His stockpile of documents of social protest has proven a boon to scholars, enabling them to study the early labor movement in detail. When he died at the age of 83, he considered this to be his legacy.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as we talked about yesterday, Trump over the weekend said he's going to go and he's going to fire the FBI director because, well, didn't get the smoking gun that he thought was coming. Couldn't get that. I guess then going to go after the CIA director, going to go after the Pentagon. Anybody who didn't do the bidding that he was requesting and demanding, evidently he's on the chopping block if he's re-elected. And please, if you haven't voted, as I said, take your ballot to the drop location. Don't put it in the mail or surrender it and vote in person. Do not allow them to steal this election by playing to the Supreme Court. But a re-election of Donald Trump, for me, I think is just chaotic, dangerous, moves us one step closer to autocracy and all the horrible things that we've been talking about. And here to share some thoughts on what that might look like, I've asked Nancy Soderberg to come talk with us. She's a former White House Deputy National Security Advisor and UN Ambassador. Nancy, thanks for taking time for us.
My pleasure.
So, I'm sure you saw this. We're going to fire Christopher Wray because he didn't dig up enough dirt. I got to imagine Billy Barr's on the chopping block for not having the smoking gun. This is crazy, isn't it?
It is. I mean, this is a president who has undermined the very essential public servants who, I've worked with them for decades. They come in and they do their job because they believe in the Constitution. They stand up, and he cannot tolerate anyone who isn't a sycophant and tries to shove them aside. And, just from one investigation after another has just pushed them aside, fired them. And it's really just downright un-American in my view.
No, no, absolutely. And this is one of those, you read those dystopian novels of the 30s of, the fascist uprising and a, dictatorial leader, using the powers of government against the people. And I see Trump being that kind of a character. Anyone he doesn't agree with or doesn't agree with him or doesn't kowtow, I fear disappearances. I fear, prosecutions. If you saw the rallies, they're doing the lock Joe Biden up chant. Now lock him up. I'm going, what do you do now?
Well, he's a one-trick pony. He's running the 2016 election again. Lock her up. The emails, and it's not going to work this time. But just stepping back for a minute on I've spent my life in foreign policy promoting human rights, democracy around the world. Never thought we'd have to worry about democracy here in the United States. And one man's election has put our entire democracy at risk. Our founding fathers says it's the best system if you can keep it. And this is our test. Can we keep our democracy? You have a Republican Party that has become sycophants to a wannabe dictator. And this is what November 3rd is all about. Stand up and make sure that your vote is counted, that you vote early, that you vote in person, however you vote, have a plan, because there is nothing more important than protecting our democracy. This is our test. Can we protect our system? I'm an optimist. I think we will. But frankly, I was shocked when Donald Trump got elected in 2016. I was shocked then. But I said to all my friends, well, our systems will provide a check and balance, so he'll moderate. And instead, the system supported him, so he's controlled the Senate, stacked the Supreme Court, and put our democracy at risk. It's terrifying.
Yeah, but that's where we differ. I predicted he was going to win in April of 16 because I went back to my hometown of Cleveland and saw my family, which, honestly speaking, they are the basket of deplorables. But they lived through deindustrialization. They lived through the destruction of what was the most prosperous working class in history. And Democrats did very little to help. And he told them everything was going to be okay. He came in and said, we're going to bring back manufacturing. We're going to bring those jobs back. We're going to bring the 1950s back where you can have one income and support a family. And they bought it.
Well, President Trump is a genius at reading the audience and hitting the lowest common denominator to which people excel. His Make America Great Again is bringing us back to the 1950s, where men were in charge, women had dinner on the table, blacks were in the place, and no Hispanics. And that subliminal messaging has worked for him in 2016, and that's what he's doubling down on in his base. Personally, he can't win with just his base.
Right.
We understand that to win, he's going to have beyond that tiny little, it's not tiny, it's 40 some odd percent of people. Unless he expands beyond that base, he cannot win. And I frankly don't understand the strategy of just doubling down the base. He doesn't have a base turnout big enough to put him over the top on November 3rd.
Yeah, well, I hope you're right. Because the people that I know in the area that I'm in, they're all in. They've already bought the they got the t-shirts and the hat. They are most
Hey, I live
certainly.
in Jacksonville, Florida. Everybody, there's Trump signs and flags everywhere, but there's also that, occasional Biden sign that gives you hope.
Yeah, but they've most certainly bought into the cult. But you brought up a moment ago that is you're going back to the 1950s, in a very male centric campaign, and to highlight that today, he said that trying to woo female voters back. Your husbands want to go back to work. We're going to get your husbands back to work, and everybody wants that. I think the wives might want to go back to work too.
He doesn't know how to talk to American families. Right now, American families are suffering from COVID, watching their family members die, worried about putting food on the table, trying to juggle kids at home. And there's no sense of empathy to understand what the American people are going through. That's why I think he's going to lose. We went through 2016, so no one's predicting anything, but unless he can reach out to the women who see his failure to protect us during COVID, he's got a hotspot going in the White House. These rallies are super spreaders. He got the best medical care and was juiced up with all sorts of steroids and drugs that saved his life. And he bounced back on the trail as if COVID is nothing. Well, American people know COVID is a major threat. We want to know, how can you keep us safe during COVID? How can we keep food on the table while we can't go to work? And there's just silence. And I think that is what Joe Biden is emphasizing on this campaign trail. President Trump can complain about, all he hears about is COVID, COVID, COVID. That's because that's what the American people are worried about. And so you need a president who's going to understand the needs of the people, understand what they're going through. And this is a president who makes it all about himself every time.
There's no question about that.
Empathy.
There's no question it is all about him all the time. You listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Nancy Soderberg, former White House Deputy National Security Advisor and UN Ambassador. I look at where we are as a country, and we're standing on the edge of a cliff. Our economy's not doing great. The COVID's surging again, and they're talking about things getting a whole lot worse quickly. Internationally, I don't think we're doing all that well. As someone who your focus was national security, I look at all of the possible Russian interference, the Chinese interference, North Korea. We're in a much less safe position now than we've probably been in most of my life. And I lived through the era of mutual assured destruction. I just see us in a really, really dangerous spot. I'm curious where you put us.
I think this is a time of great choice for the American people. We've had great prosperity under the last administration that fueled an economic boom in the early pre-COVID times of the Trump administration. But Americans are hurting now. We need a president who can lead us into recovery, dealing with science and facts. And I think what we need to have now is a return to our values. I think the American people are strong. They want to return to normalcy. Everyone's just tired of the chaos. It's like, turn the noise off and let's not have to worry about what the president's tweeting. Let's not worry about a president who's going to fire someone because they oppose him, or some foreign deal, or the corruption that's going on in this White House. And I think I'm a strong believer in the American public knowing the difference between right and wrong. And they know that we want to get back to normal, that we want to have a president who listens to the American people, that they end up doing what's right for us instead of jamming through Supreme Court nominees literally a week before the election. And I think ultimately, I think the American people are going to stand up and say, this is just wrong, and let's try and move it forward. On the American safety and the international security side, our allies are skeptical of us. They are deeply concerned that the America, which is always a standard of living up to your word, if America said they would do something, you could take that to the bank. We've pulled out of one accord after another. We pulled out of the WHO during a pandemic, the World Health Organization during a pandemic. And I talked to a lot of my friends and allies around the world who don't know really quite what to make of that. They're hoping that we return to normalcy, but it's going to take a long time for us to rebuild that trust.
No.
And I think the world, people who, I call it the Humpty Dumpty effect, people who think we can just go back to the world on President Obama's last day are fooling themselves. The world has fundamentally changed under President Obama. America's image, under President Trump, America's image has fundamentally changed under President Trump. And we have to change the way we deal with the world, which means putting more people at the table, being more empathetic to the needs of the rest of the world, and showing that we're a reliable partner. And it's going to take several terms of a president before we earn that trust back.
So there's no just going, hey, you know what? We just had a little spasm. We let the crazy guy with the, we let the curmudgeon who was screaming at the TV. We let him in charge for a little bit. We've stepped back.
That was the view. That was the view after George W. Bush. An aberration. Okay, the Iraq War was a bad choice. And literally the world gave Barack Obama the Nobel Peace Prize just for getting elected. He hadn't done anything. And they were so relieved. And then to have 8 years of Obama followed by this great disruptor who cares more about our relations with the dictators around, dictators of, Russia, Poland, Hungary, Duterte in the Philippines, and tries to, fall in love with the dictators of North Korea, fails to stand up to the Saudis who murdered a journalist who was a resident of the United States in our close NATO allies consulate in our NATO allies of Turkey, and just fundamentally undermine America's values. And it's going to take us. Your listeners should not think that if Joe Biden wins, that on January 20th in 2021, the world goes back to how it was pre-Trump. They're mistaken. It's going to take a long time for us to repair this damage. And I'd like to think that we could take advantage of some of the disruption to remake the world. It took World War II for us to create the UN, all these international organizations, to recognize that we need alliance. Let's take the advantage. What can we rebuild differently? The world wasn't perfect under Barack Obama. So can we make the Security Council broader so it represents today's world? Can we make ensure that the Chinese stop stealing our intellectual property rights? I think there's an opportunity that Joe Biden has, if he is to win, to sort of say, all right, world wasn't great. It led to dictators like Erdogan and Putin and a disruptor like Trump. So what's wrong with this system? And let's come together and make sure that we return to our values, rebuild the system. Remember, the richest 8 billion men in the world own more than all the wealth of the bottom 4 billion people in this earth. That's wrong. So what can we do about income inequality? How can we remake it so that American people and the working classes around the world feel that their governments work for them? So I think if Joe Biden wins, we have an opportunity to rebuild it like we did after World War II and think, okay, there's something wrong going on. Let's come together and fix it. So I think it's a great opportunity to come in with people who share my values of making sure that hardworking Americans and workers around the world get a fair deal, a decent wage, that women have health care and can choose when to have their children, and that their families can live in dignity. That's what we should be fighting for if Joe Biden is elected. And I think the chaos that has been created creates an opening that we all should come together and insist that our next government and world do.
Yeah, I'm with you, but because I've called for a new age Bretton Woods Accord, because our trade policies clearly aren't working for workers in this country. We've definitely got to do something, and I think that's the nut that the blind squirrel and Trump found, because that's what people are angry about. They're angry that their opportunities aren't what they used to be, and that our government hasn't been working for the average everyday working person. And that's where
And
I think
they're
a lot
right.
of people.
That is true. I mean, where are unions in today's world? Where are your who has a pension? Who has health care insurance in their older age? Who can make sure that they can retire with dignity or take care of their families? All of us have family members who've had major illnesses in their older years. How do you pay for that? Lord, help us if anyone has a mental health issue or drug addiction. None of that is covered. And so I think what we need to do is vote, 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 and then start demanding real change on November 4th. Or November 8th before we know who wins. But
right.
This is an opportunity to really fundamentally reshape our priorities here. And I think all of your viewers have a role in making sure that we do that. Stand up, make sure your voice is heard, demand justice for the middle class. It's time. And in a way, if we play this right, Donald Trump will pave the way to make sure that the American workers are defended and workers around the world have dignity.
From your lips. I'm hoping that's right. I've been saying, January 20th at 12:01 on that day. That's when the work really begins, because we got to do a bunch of things simultaneously. Got to clean up the mess of these last 4 years and all of the fires that they've built, and then figure out how you're going to actually do the hard work, as you pointed out.
Well, but think of the possibilities. I teach, and I've seen in the last 15 years of evolution in our next generation that, 15 years ago, they were wondering whether climate change was real. They were wondering if the skeptics were right. Nobody in the younger generation questions the need for climate change. They accept the differences among us, probably because they're all on their phones and nobody sees who they're talking to. So who cares what their sexual preference is or their race is? And they are fact-based. They can fact check anything, and they know how to fact check. And so this next generation, I think, is prepared to move us into a fact-based, science-based, unified global solution to our challenges. And I'm optimistic that if Joe Biden wins, that's going to unleash a whole new effort to fix these problems, fueled by the next generation.
I'm right there with you, Nancy.
You guys, if you're in the next generation, make sure you vote. Most important thing you do is go vote early, and make sure that your vote is counted.
Good stuff. Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate the time.
My pleasure.
Nancy Soderberg, former White House National Deputy Security Advisor, also UN Ambassador. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1948. That was the day that a thick yellow fog rolled over the town of Donora, Pennsylvania, just south of Pittsburgh. Donora was a mill town, nestled in a valley on the banks of the Monongahela River. By 1948, the town had grown to 14,000 people who came to work in the town's steel mills and the Donora Zinc Works. For years, the local residents had complained about the pollution that spilled from the plants. Smog was a regular occurrence, but this fog was even worse than usual. A layer of cold air was trapping a noxious blend of nitrogen dioxide, sulfuric acid, and fluoride pollution. 24 hours passed, and still the fog grew denser. The police and local doctors began to receive reports of people having difficulty breathing. The fog had become so thick that residents could not see to drive. For 5 days, the smog hung over the town until a rain began to break it up. Nearly half of the town's residents became ill. 20 died. U.S. Steel refused to take blame for the fog. even though they continued to run the plant as the deadly toxins continued to build. According to a 2010 article by the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, despite the efforts of industry to cast the tragedy as an act of God, the fatalities in Donora received national attention. The event changed the way air pollution was viewed, moving it rapidly from an aesthetic issue to a public health concern, and spurred local, state, and federal officials to control toxic air pollution. In 2008, a smog museum opened with the motto, "Clean air starts here." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So we are certainly in interesting times, and it was really nice talking with Nancy, Ambassador Soderberg, about where we are, where we've been, where we're going. And I'll tell you, I think 4 more years of Trump on the international stage, and we will certainly be alone among our allies and at home. I wanted to get into a little bit about, if she were looking at us from a different perspective, how unstable are we? And I fear that we're fairly unstable as a country. If we were looking at us from the other side, I got to wonder how we would view looking at our election system, which is not looking good. View how unstable we are as a populace. It used to be, I guess it's just that I'm old enough to remember when you could have people that you talked politics with, and it would get spirited, but I don't ever remember really devolving into, I'll smack you or I'll shoot you, or I don't remember that. And I've been having a lot of those kind of conversations lately with people who, are wholly invested in Donald Trump. And it's not even the policies, because they don't really understand the policies, because he doesn't have any. It's not like they can go, no, I'm for Donald Trump because, Donald Trump is going to make America great again. That's what I get. I go, well, how is he going to do that? And how have we been made? He said he was going to bring coal jobs back. I told you 4 years ago, coal is not coming back. It's not going to happen. As much as you may wish it to come back, it's not. Buggy whips are not coming back. Giant vacuum tubes that used to run TVs, not coming back. Horse and buggies, not coming back. Coal is not coming back. Look, what we want is not the coal. We want the jobs. We want the income. We want the lifestyle. So what we should be doing is taking the jobs that we currently have and, making those good union jobs. Because what made those coal jobs good? The United Mine Workers. The UMWA made those living wage jobs. Made those the best jobs in the region. How? Pretty simple. Collective bargaining. Demanding a fair share of the work that they do. And, again, I keep coming back to this policy stuff because, look, Joe Biden wasn't my first choice. Wasn't my second, third, fourth, maybe fourth. I put him usually at fifth, but maybe fourth or fifth. But I do see Joe Biden as someone who will move us in the right direction. I do see his policies as more moderate than what I would like to do. I would like to see big, bold change because it's been 45 years of attacks by the corporate wing of the Republican Party and the radicals who have swung the pendulum of profitability, of prosperity away from we, the working class, to the wealth class. The original intent of the Constitution: protect property, life, liberty, pursuit of property. It wasn't supposed to be pursuit of happiness. It was pursuit of private property. That's the original intent. That was the mindset. protect the wealthy, protect the well-to-do away from the unwashed masses. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that pendulum swing. But I got into a conversation about a guy who said he was a veteran for Trump. And I'm like, I respect our veterans. I respect, people who serve in the military. I do have a problem with the way we use our military. Big problem with that. I have a problem with the institution. But the people who don the uniform and carry the gun into battle, I have the utmost respect for. And I'm someone who says we have to absolutely, unequivocally, without question, care for them. And it was his belief that Donald Trump has done that. Trump has cared for the VA. He's taken care of the VA. He's taken care of the veterans. And it's a lot of wild claims about these major accomplishments that can't be verified. That's the thing that gets me. Everything that this guy threw out, you have to take on blind faith. And I guess that blind faith seems to be at the heart of the Trump ideology. You have to believe. If I had to choose a Republican phrase to go with that, I'm going to go with Ronald Reagan. Trust, but verify. I can't verify what they want me to believe. And that's a problem. But I got into this discussion and, about how we take care of, heroes. And I brought up 9/11 as well, the people that we put on pedestals. And I've talked about this before. How, at the moment, we're, oh, thank you, you're wonderful. We heap praise upon them, maybe a penny or two, but more praise. We bow, we do all that stuff. And not much to follow up. And the guy that I was talking to, I guarantee was one of the people who bought the magnetic ribbon for his car. He's the guy who, when the national anthem starts, he snaps to and he's saluting. All the gestures you could imagine. The hyper-patriotism stuff that we see people doing. And I'm sure he's even got the flag underwear to go with it. Which I'm not going to get into, but I'm most certainly positive that flag underwear is a violation of the flag code. But let's not get into that. But it's one of these things that it's all symbolism. It's all words. It's all things to make people feel like they're doing something without actually doing something. Gestures to make, and I would argue gestures that make them feel more patriotic. It's more about them and their feelings than the rest of us. It's more about being part of the crowd than it's about solving any actual problem, like what's happened to our veterans and what happens to the people in our military. And so as this guy's rambling on, and to be honest, I'm not following what he's talking about. But the thing is he's emphatic. He's emphatic that he supports the troops, Donald Trump supports the troops, and liberals hate the military. And liberals hate the troops. Those are his points. And there's no real talk about exactly what Trump has done. And I chimed in and I'm like, okay, I've let you ramble on now for, about 4 minutes. I didn't time it, but it was about 4 minutes of just blather. And I said, but, what policies has he moved forward on? And he brought up the right of the troops to go and seek private health care. And I said, well, to be honest, that was Obama's doing. That passed under Obama. It went into effect under Trump's administration, but that was passed back then. If there wasn't adequate care or where you were, that you could seek other private doctors. But here's the problem with this, and this is where I went, and I said, look, the problem with that is most sleepy town doctors, most hospitals have no idea how to treat people with military ailments. The thing about the VA that's so important is they have institutional knowledge. They deal with certain things over and over and over again. So they have the expertise to deal with the issues that these problems these folks have. Why would you want to create a system where you're breaking up the institutional knowledge and opening it up to the profiteer. I mean, how is that helpful? And yeah, you get the same kind of, well, the VA is a failure and all this. I go, but overwhelmingly, the military people think that the VA is good. In fact, I know some old timers who, you take their VA care away, man. They take their TRICARE away. They're gonna come after you. But then I started in on this other thing that's been on my mind for a while. Because I've said for a number of years that the only time we do things in this country is when we can couch it in terms of the military. And I point back to the school lunch program of the 1940s. Harry Truman signed the National School Lunch Act into law. I think 1946 it was, right at the end of World War II. And it was because, now understand, the school milk program had started back, sometime during the First World War. And much like this school lunch program, the argument was, we've got so many poor kids that they're not, I swear this was the argument, that they're not physically capable of carrying a gun into battle, that they're so malnourished that we basically got to fatten them up so they can fight. I mean, that's kind of the argument. And we were able to push that through the school lunch program, the school milk program, and that stuff under the guise of we're helping the military. And I said, how about if that's our mindset? And oddly enough, this person agreed with me. He goes, yeah, I remember that. I've heard that too. I said, if that's the point, how about we help soldiers? How about we help our troops before they're soldiers? Much like Truman did in 46. By saying, look, we need soldiers who are able to carry the gun and march up the hill. We need somebody with the proper nutrition to be able to do that. So let's feed them as children. So it was my thought of, why don't we take that same model and say, our kids need health care. Our kids need nutrition. Our kids need good education. Our kids need, go down the list. Our kids need, therapy. I was reading a story not too long ago. And they were talking about, I guess there was a study done on the number of soldiers suffering from PTSD and other mental ailments, and even things like diabetes and other things, who, as children, experienced these ACEs, what they call adverse childhood experiences, physical and emotional abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. You go down the list, caregivers, substance abuse, what my wife and I talk about all the time, what's it going to be? What are our kids going to blame us for when they get to be older? Because what we do is we always look back and we blame our parents for anything that goes wrong. Well, in some of these cases, that's actually factual. Just massive dysfunction, because when I was a kid, now this is going back a ways, when I was a kid, the people who joined the military were the people who didn't have any real options. The way to get out of our housing project, there are only 3 ways out of the housing project that I lived in. You were a really good athlete and you got to go to college and you got out. You joined the military and you got out, or you died. It was that simple. And with them came all of those problems. We've done virtually nothing to stop those problems from happening to these kids. So it was my argument to this guy, how about if you need a policy, and if you've got, Donald Trump's, red phone, you could pick up the orange phone. I said red, I should have said orange. But if you've got, the direct line to Trump, how about we start, since we love the military, how about we start taking care of our children that way by saying, look, a lot of the stresses that our military are going through stem from their childhood. How about we make sure that their childhood isn't that bad? How about we make sure that they're fed and clothed and they get a decent education and they have stability in their home lives? And that happens by making sure that people have decent jobs and community that isn't in chaos. And we deal with substance abuse as an illness and not a crime, so we don't break up families by locking people up. There's so much we could be doing if you just look at let's take care of our soldiers by making sure that we care for them before they're soldiers. And he wasn't going with me. There was, and I knew it was a bridge too far. I did. But it was one of those things that, I feel passionately about. Take care of the people who in the future are going to be our heroes. And then keep your word after they are our heroes. We've got homeless veterans in this country. What does that say about us? We're the richest country in the history of civilization at its wealthiest moment. And we have people sleeping on the street. We have families sleeping on the street. And I know. Cry me a river, play the violin, you liberal. I get it. Which is kind of what I got, bleeding heart. But here's the thing. It's not about being a bleeding heart. It's about being a pragmatist. It's about saying, how do we solve problems? How do we fix things? How do we ensure that the future generation of soldiers don't have to go through all of the problems that past generations have had to go through? And I know people love to say, well, in my day, well, your day was messed up. Let's fix that. And I'm guilty of it as well. When I was a kid, we did this. And you stop back and think about it and go, boy, that was messed up. I'm sure glad my kids don't go through that. And I'm sure my kids will look back on how we've on how we've raised them and go, that was pretty screwed up. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do it better. What happened to that we want to do better? And this is what I asked the guy. I go, to me, politics is about, one, who gets what, but two, how do we get to that more perfect union? How do we get to that place where we actually hold to our word? We hold to that value of patriotism, that when we stand and salute the flag, that means something. It's not a meaningless gesture. It's something to make you feel better. I'm not sure. I don't know if that's a conversation that in this era of our politic is possible. But it's something I think we have to talk about. And it's a place that I really desperately want to get to because I want to solve our problems. I don't like the fact that we are so close to what I see as a violent era of people harming each other in the streets. All because both sides are desperate. All because both sides are hungry. All because both sides are not doing as well as they should be. It just seems to me we can do better. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, we beg. Rick Smith.
As a Texas high schooler many moons ago, I was the 115-pound outside linebacker on the Denison Yellow Jackets football team. Go Bugs! We won very few games, but we had spirit and some fun. Our coach, a down-to-earth fellow paid a modest public school salary, tried to instill a bit of the sporting ethic in us. Win or lose, give it your best. There is no I in team, stuff like that. So whistle me out of bounds in the game of life, but I'm somewhere between sad and disgusted that the self-centered corporate ethic, survival of the greediest, is becoming the guiding spirit of even amateur games. The decline is most prevalent in big-time football programs where coaches make millions while the actual athletes are paid nothing and face crippling, even life-threatening injuries. But when the pandemic slammed into college budgets, squeezing out professors, students, and workers, the old-school spirit kicked in and coaches made widely publicized sacrifices, accepting pay cuts of 15 to 20%. Yay, coach! Only it was a scam. Their cuts only applied to their base salary, not the full compensation they actually get. North Carolina coach Mack Brown, for example, draws $750,000 in base pay, which ain't bad, but his full paycheck is $3.5 million a year. So his ballyhooed sacrifice is really only 3%. He's still taking about $3.4 million in pay. But wait, the scam gets scummier, for even these minimal cuts are just deferments in pay. University of Texas coach Tom Herman, for example, took a $500,000 cut, but with a cynical wink, the university promised to give that same sum back to him within 3 years. This is Jim Hightower saying, what models of sporting character they are, teaching young people that it's not how you play the game that counts, but whether you win.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street...
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So 8 days before an election, Mitch McConnell and the GOP-led Senate rammed through Amy Coney Barrett onto the Supreme Court. And look, I agreed with Mitch McConnell, and I hope it's something. I hope his words he remembers. They had the power to do it. They had the ability to do it because they had the power. I'm hoping that Schumer and the Democrats, if in this election they get control of the Senate, that they actually listen to his words. When you have the control, when you have the power, you do what you are able to do. For me, the whole series, the whole bit of hearings, that's what it boils down to for me. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on what's it going to mean now that there is a radical right-wing Supreme Court here in the U.S. and a 6-3 one at that. I've asked Ian Millhiser to come talk with us. He's a senior correspondent over at Vox Media and one of my go-to guys, anything Supreme Court. Ian, thanks for taking time for us.
Great to be here. Thanks, Rick.
So let's start with it. 8 days, 8 days before an election,
Yep.
Not too soon, evidently, to let the American people decide as they had claimed back in 2016.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the background here is that I think Justice Scalia died something like 270 days before an election, and the Republicans said that, that's too close to an election to confirm a justice, but 8 days is fine. And on top of all that, Trump said very explicitly the reason why he wanted this seat filled was he thinks there might be a contested election, and he wants to make sure that this ninth seat is filled with his person, so that person can help decide who wins the election. So, it's worrisome. It is very worrisome that the Supreme Court is going to try to put a thumb on the scale in this election.
Yeah, I'm not worried about just the thumb. I'm worried about the whole hand, both hands, a foot, whole thigh. I'm worried about just jumping on the scale and jumping up and down with a pogo stick. But we will see. Now, before we get into all that, because I do have a bunch of questions on that, he also said that the reason that he's going to appoint anyone to the Supreme Court is they're going to be overturn Roe, the end of abortion in the country. Do you agree with Lisa Murkowski that she seems to think no, it's not going to happen? She doesn't believe that. Where do you think this is going to go?
Well, look, I mean, Justice Barrett signed a statement that called Roe v. Wade an infamous decision. She signed another statement where she pledged to oppose abortion rights. So, I mean, there's not a lot of ambiguity.
Right.
I thought that Roe was doomed when Justice Kennedy stepped down and was replaced with Kavanaugh, who was also very anti-abortion. But in case there was any doubt before that, there's really no way to look at Barrett's record and, have much uncertainty about what she thinks about abortion.
Yeah, I've been reading the stories today that, obviously the day after, she's sworn in, evidently able to show up to work today. All of the people going, life is fundamentally going to change. This is the end of the world as we know it. And, I've had people tell me, well, that's just hyperbole. Things are going to go on fine. I actually think it is a major tectonic shift in the way things are going to operate in this country.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's worrisome. you're going to see, I think, a lot of abortion clinics shut down, and the people who are going to be impacted by that are going to be people who are not rich.
Right.
I mean, if you're wealthy and you need an abortion, or your wife or daughter needs an abortion, you can fly them to New York, and if it's illegal in New York, you can fly them to Canada. So like this is, this is just going to be something that impacts poor Americans, because it's going to impact people who don't have the ability to pay to fly people to New York for medical procedures. And I mean, that's, I think, going to be an across-the-board issue. I mean, if they strike down the Affordable Care Act, people who are relatively well off are going to be fine. People who have health insurance through their employer and a stable job are going to be fine. It's going to be the people who need to be able to get care on the individual market, or people who need Medicaid, who are going to be the ones hurt by it.
Right. And look, to highlight your point, it's going to be the advantaged and the well-to-do, they're going to be fine. They're always fine. It's the rest of us who maybe not, from workers' rights to consumer rights to women's rights to civil rights, all down the list. It's going to break on, where your privilege is, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can go to Whole Foods tomorrow, and I'm sure everyone there is going to, be hanging out and thinking like life is great. But if you aren't able to pay $3 for a mango, then you're going to really notice how the world changes once Barrett and these other really conservative justices start handing down decisions.
Because as I was talking to a friend yesterday, and I said, the thing is we don't know what's coming because there aren't all these cases in the pipeline yet. But I guarantee you tonight there are a bunch of these right-wing groups who are dreaming up the most outrageous cases that they can work their way through to get to the Supreme Court that she will have the ability to rule on. And it doesn't even matter what Roberts thinks, because now Roberts is the would you consider him the ideological center of the court at this point, as far right as I would assume he is?
I mean, at this point, Roberts is irrelevant. I mean, if there is an intellectual center on this court, it's Brett Kavanaugh. And the difference between Roberts and Kavanaugh, I mean, Roberts is really conservative, but I think Roberts has understood that the Supreme Court has a limited well of power and influence and legitimacy. And if the court pushes too hard, people are going to push back on it. And Kavanaugh just doesn't seem to have that instinct. I mean, Kavanaugh seems, if he thinks that there's a particular end, and it could be something really radical. He wrote an opinion yesterday suggesting that we should fundamentally rewrite the way that elections have worked in this country for at least the last 100 years. He's just going to do it.
Interestingly enough, the last 100 years, women have had the right to vote. Conceivably, I mean, is it something we're talking about? I mean, I've been saying that, this court is going to, and it's been my assessment from the beginning, going to undo the 20th century. Is this part of it?
Well, I mean, the way that I think the court tends to approach elections, the way that, the Republican voter suppression has worked for the last decade or so, is it tends to focus on people at the margin. So again, well-to-do women will be fine. They'll get to vote. And most people will still get to vote. What's insidious about operate. So this decision from yesterday says that certain ballots that are mailed before the election day but arrive after election day were going to be counted. The Supreme Court said, nope, they're not going to be counted. And that matters because, there are a lot of folks who, the mail's running slow. They might not get their ballot on time, or it might not be delivered on time, not because of anything that they've done wrong. And the polls show that most people who are voting by mail are Democrats. So if you prevent some mail-in ballots from being counted, you're probably going to disenfranchise Democrats. What's insidious about it is, no one can say that they've been stripped completely of their right to vote. You can still vote if you jump through the right hoops. It just skims a few people off the top. And you see that with a lot of things. Voter ID law. most people have an ID, but like the people who don't have IDs tend to be low-income people, voters of color, students, and all of those are groups that tend to prefer Democrats over Republicans. Give them a few more people off the top.
Right.
And if you keep skimming like that, eventually there just aren't enough Democrats left for the Democratic Party to compete.
Yeah, if you tend to, as the cross-check scheme that Chris Kobach came up with, you tend to try and look at people who might move around a lot or might not vote in an election or two, and try and chuck them off the list, claiming that they've moved. That also goes after the same targeted group that you're talking about.
Right, and you see this in Texas passed a law which said that gun licenses could be used as an ID to vote, but student IDs cannot. Now, even student IDs from the University of Texas system, so state-issued IDs. Now, both a gun permit and a student ID from the University of Texas, they're both government-issued permits. There's no reason why you should trust one more than the other. The difference is that people who have student IDs tend to prefer Democrats, and people who have gun permits tend to prefer Republicans.
Yeah, it's scary stuff. Now, I did want to ask you, because you talked about the Wisconsin case, where they said that if it's received after Election Day, sorry, we're not gonna count it. But there was just the Pennsylvania case that said, if it's postmarked by Election Day, there's up to 3 days after, they'll count them. And if it doesn't have a postmark, as long as there isn't some extenuating circumstance of how it was received, not after Election Day, it's still going to be counted. So I'm curious, why the difference? Because they both seem the same to me. They're both saying that if you mailed your ballot in on Election Day and it got to us 2 or 3 days later, we're still going to count it. Why does one case go one way, the other one go the other?
Yes. So the answer here, you're right that they're almost identical cases. The only real difference between them is that one case came up through a federal court. It was a federal trial court that said that the ballots in Wisconsin had to be counted. And one case came up through the state court system. It was the state Supreme Court of Pennsylvania that says the ballots have to be counted in Pennsylvania. And in the law, that's actually a really important distinction. The way that things have always worked for, as far as I know, forever, as long as there's been a United States, is that the Supreme Court of the United States has the last word on questions of federal law, but state Supreme Courts had the last word on questions of state law. So if there's a question of whether someone is a lawful voter, whether a particular ballot should be counted under Pennsylvania state law, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is supposed to have the last word. And, that's the reason why these two cases went differently.
Yeah, but
Robert... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, but here's my question, because it's the same issue. It's the states are supposed to be the place where the voting laws are taken care of. That each state has their way of doing it and their laws. Why was the Wisconsin case taken to a federal court and the Pennsylvania case taken to the state court?
I suspect that the real answer to that is that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has a 5-2 Democratic majority, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court has a 4-3 Republican majority.
Okay.
So, lawyers, go for the court where they think they're going to win.
Yeah, but you're going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, where I don't know. I don't know that that's a winner.
Right, and that's the thing, is that what I think is really going on here, and this is what scares me the most about these Wisconsin opinions that we got yesterday. So this opinion was handed down literally as the Senate was voting on the Barrett confirmation. So it was still an 8-justice court, and the Wisconsin decision was 5-3, with Roberts writing an opinion saying, look, we can overrule a federal court, we can't overrule a state court, so I'm going to overrule this because it involves a federal court. State courts can do what they want. But 4 members of the current court, the 4 Republicans who aren't Roberts, have all signaled that they want to be able to overrule state Supreme Court two.
Right. And this is where the Kavanaugh quote comes in, where he said under the U.S. Constitution, the state courts don't have a blank check to rewrite state election laws for federal elections. This is where this is getting all that play.
That's exactly right. So like these Republican justices have this theory that, I mean, they're right that the state legislature gets to write the state law. That's not anything anyone disagrees with. The question is, let's say that there's any kind of election dispute. The Democratic Party, there's a pile of 10,000 ballots. The Democratic Party thinks they should be counted. The Republican Party thinks that they shouldn't. And both argue that Pennsylvania state law requires the outcome that they want. The Democrats say Pennsylvania state law says they must be counted, and Republicans say Pennsylvania state law says they must not be counted. Someone has to resolve that dispute. And in the United States, for, again, as long as I think the United States has been around, the body that gets to resolve that dispute has been the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania.
Right.
That has always been how it works. And now, we have a Democratic Supreme Court in Pennsylvania, and we have a Republican Supreme Court of the United States. So all of a sudden, the Republican Supreme Court of the United States is saying, well, we don't want to follow the rule that's been around forever. We're going to make up a new rule. And, they have some justification where they point to some language in the Constitution. It's not particularly convincing, but they have a legal sounding argument for why they want to do this. But, I mean, I'm watching this, and it's hard for me not to look at this with cynicism, that, like, the real reason why they don't want the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to have the last word is because they don't like the decisions that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is handing down.
Yeah, I mean, and to me, this is one of these weird moments because, for me, the Janus case is one of those things where, Mr. Balls and Strikes upended 40 years of decided law. Even though he said he believed in this stare decisis or decided law. And there's been a whole bunch of this stuff that we've upended how things were going to be. And I fear that we're moving into an era where, as a lot of the headlines I'm reading, fundamentally things are going to shift in a huge way, and elections being the first thing that's going to happen. Because what happens if, as you're pointing out, that there are a bunch of ballots that don't get counted or get thrown out, and one side wins or the other side wins, and now you've got chaos.
Right.
I don't know I know you get this, but I don't know if most people do. We're in a really hot moment in this country where both sides are about to explode. And to have the court be the reason for that is kind of frightening to me.
Yeah, no, it really is frightening. And I mean, like, I know this distinction I'm drawing between, like, whether, like, you can overrule a federal court or a state Supreme Court seems really technical, and it is. I mean, it's one of those distinctions that only lawyers can care about. But it's also one of the most basic and most important distinctions in U.S. law. Like, I think I was in my second day of law school when my civil procedure professor said to me, oh, by the way, there's this rule that state Supreme Courts have the final word on questions of state law. Like, it's just something that's foundational to our system. Right,
but isn't it one of these things that you go, Ian, that because look, I know most of my conservative friends, they love to say that they're states' rights people. This falls right into it. So it's odd to me that the people who call themselves conservatives are doing everything they can do to usurp the states' right argument.
Right. And I mean, like, you just can't call this court conservative at this point, because, like, conservative, like, it's right there in the word. Conservatives want to conserve things. And what's going on in these lawsuits is that the Democratic Party is saying, hey, like, there's this rule that you followed for the last 120 years. We would like to conserve this rule that's been around for 120 years. And what the Republicans are saying is, we want you to get rid of this rule that's been around for, 120 years or more. So it's really quite frightening. And, like, the reason I keep coming back to how, like, foundational and, like, how set this rule is that if they're willing to question something that's this foundational, that's like a day two of law school thing, what else are they going to do? They could throw anything out the window.
Yeah, and I'm expecting anything to get thrown out the window. So the last line of questioning I've got for you, because obviously the first thing that I'm worried about is the election, which is just a week away. here in Pennsylvania, where I'm at, we're now telling people that you can get your mail-in ballot in as long as it's postmarked on election day. It's going to be counted up to 3 days late. If it gets here, it'll be counted by the 6th, because that's what the Supreme Court has deferred to the state Supreme Court for. Is there a chance that changes? Is there a chance that within this short period of time, with Barrett on the court, that this fundamental shift could happen before our eyes?
Oh, I think there's a very serious risk that the Supreme Court is going to change the rules midstream. And I mean, like, anyone listening to this, if you haven't voted yet, I recommend, vote in person if you feel safe doing it. If you don't feel safe voting in person, put your ballot in a drop box. At this point, I think the risk that the Supreme Court is going to order a bunch of mail-in ballots thrown in the trash is so high that, I would find some way to be sure that you have delivered your ballot, whether it means voting in person, whether it means putting it in a drop box, whether it means filling out your absentee ballot and then personally driving it to the elections office. Do what you have to do, because I think the danger that the Supreme Court is going to retroactively invalidate, and it could be tens of thousands of ballots, is high.
Yeah, and in a state like Pennsylvania, that the polling's fairly close, a lot closer than I'm comfortable with. That could be the deciding factor. But ultimately, my fear then becomes is no matter how this plays out, the loser is going to claim that they were cheated, and we end up seeing potentially violence in the streets.
Yeah, no, I mean it's really troubling. I mean, like the one of the most troubling things about what's happening in the Supreme Court right now is that I think people, I think this way, are justifiably perceiving the Supreme Court as a partisan actor. And when the courts start to be viewed as parties that, are playing for one team or the other, rather than, as neutral umpires, as John Roberts said, then people just stop listening to them. And if you don't have courts, you don't have a way to peacefully resolve these disputes.
Yeah. No, and considering the fact that, 4 of the 5 were appointed by, presidents who did not win the popular vote. So they really don't have the consent of the majority of the country.
Well, the really scary thing, so the first justice in American history to be nominated by a president who lost the popular vote and confirmed by a block of senators who represent less than half the country was Gorsuch, Trump's first appointee. The second was Kavanaugh, his second appointee, and the third is Barrett. So we now have a third of the Supreme Court that, owes their job to minority rule.
Yeah, well, also, didn't George W. Bush lose the popular vote?
He did. And if you look at the numbers there, Sam Alito, I believe, was also confirmed by a block of senators who represent less than half the country.
Right.
So, here's the data point that I always like to pull out. If you are 31 years old, you have only lived through one election where Republicans have won the popular vote. That was the 2004 election. And 31 is pretty old. You've probably been doing your job for a while if you're 31. If you're done with school by the time you're 31, unless you're getting a PhD or something like you have lived a lot of life when you are 31, and yet you've only seen one election, when a Republican won, and yet Republicans get to keep controlling so much.
Yeah, it's scary stuff. I know I said last question, but I got to ask this. Now that the court is 6-3, there's a lot of people on the left saying we need to pack the court. I've advocated for if Schumer and the Democrats get the power to follow the rules and add 3 additional justices to make it a 6-6 court. And I know that I've had people yell at me at both sides. I'm curious. What do you think?
My view is that if they do pull the trigger, they need to add at least 4 seats, because if you're going to kick the bear, you better beat it.
There's an argument. See, my thought is if you make it an even court, you say, okay, we're admitting it's a political body, and now it's going to be even, and now they're going to have to hammer out decisions to get some legitimacy for the governed, so that we then, as you said, don't end up, figuring out how to deal with problems other ways, and it doesn't look like a power grab. I guess that's just me being a liberal.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's hard. I mean, like, realistically, Republicans feel like they won fair and square. And I mean, the scary thing is that they actually did play by the rules. I mean, the rules say that Donald Trump won the 2016 election, even though he got 3 million less votes. The problem is that the rules are unfair. And so we need, and by we, I mean the United States of America, needs to think about ways to make our country into a democracy. And that's just going to be very tough to do when you have a political party, one of your two major political parties, gains a whole lot from us not being a democracy.
Yeah, you're right. Ian, I appreciate the time. Always great talk with you. I hope you'll come back again and share some more with us.
All right, thank you.
Thanks so much, our good friend Ian Millhiser, senior correspondent there at Vox Media. Make sure you check out his work. Follow his work. He does amazing stuff. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. Where working people come to talk.
This is storm number 27, by the way. 28 is the record, so we're only one away.
Yet another hurricane takes aim at the Gulf Coast.
The winds came with a vengeance, flames and thick smoke darkening the sky.
Yet another round of hurricane-force winds and fires in California and Colorado. Plus,
you both have very different visions on climate change.
Truth and nonsense on climate change at the final presidential debate of 2020.
All of that truth and nonsense straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand back and stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
They want to spend $100 trillion. They want to knock down buildings and build new buildings with little, tiny, small windows.
Yes, so you can open them with your little, tiny, small hands. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, we are officially out of Greek letters that I know in the alphabet. So where are we now in this record-breaking storm season?
We are now up to Hurricane Zeta, another hurricane for the Gulf of Mexico. It is on track to strike near the Louisiana-Alabama border around Wednesday. Yes, we are now into the Greek alphabet because there have been so many storms in this historic 2020 Atlantic hurricane season. Zeta is the earliest 27th named storm in recorded history, arriving a full month earlier than the previous record 27th storm that hit back in 2005. Zeta is the 11th named storm to landfall in the continental United States, and that is a new record for the most U.S. landfalling storms in a single year. And Zeta also sets a new record for Louisiana as the 5th named storm to hit the state in a single season. That is a very unwelcome new record, I should add.
Poor Louisiana. Let's hope that Zeta may not hit Louisiana after all.
I don't think there's a chance of that, but let's hope that the impacts are minimal.
Okay.
Meanwhile, out west,
two of the largest fires in Colorado's history are burning dangerously close together, and there are fears that they could merge into one gigantic inferno.
Of course they will.
In Colorado, some snow has finally arrived to help firefighters slow the spread of two of the largest wildfires in state history, the Cameron Peak Fire and the East Troublesome Fire, very well named. They're both burning in the same county and could merge. The growing fires have forced the evacuation of thousands of residents and the closure of Rocky Mountain National Park. The three largest fires in Colorado state history have all hit since July of this year.
Still just a coincidence, just like the, 5 of the 6 largest fires in state history out here in California happen to all hit this year?
Yep, and in Southern California, 2 firefighters have been critically injured, and mandatory evacuations have been ordered for 100,000 residents during a pandemic due to the fast growth of the Silverado fire that erupted on Monday near Irvine, south of Los Angeles. Nearly the entire state is now facing a new round of extreme fire weather with dangerous hurricane-force winds and extremely low humidity. Utilities cut electricity to thousands across the state so that their equipment didn't spark new fires.
It is late October. How long is this fire season expected to continue?
Fire season's pretty much year-round now, so good luck with guessing that one. Finally, in the final presidential debate of the endless 2020 election, Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden laid out starkly different visions on climate change. Donald Trump has presented no formal plan to address climate change, and indeed plans to further expand domestic fossil fuel extraction, making climate change even worse. Trump again took credit for President Obama's policies that have reduced air and water pollution and carbon emissions, along with delivering some colorful lies about windows and birds and wind energy and more. Biden pressed his $2 trillion plan to reinvigorate the U.S. economy and create millions of jobs by acting to solve climate change.
$2 trillion?
$2 trillion.
Donald Trump says it's $100 trillion.
And Donald Trump is lying.
Oh.
Biden's plan also includes upgrading the nation's infrastructure and transitioning to clean energy. But the biggest moment of the night was when Biden acknowledged the scientific reality that the U.S. will transition away from fossil fuels.
I would transition from the oil industry, yes.
Oh,
I would
that's
transition.
a big statement.
It is a big statement. Because I would stop.
Why would you do that?
Because the oil industry pollutes significantly. Because it has to be replaced by renewable energy over time.
We
And
have
that's
one
maybe the
final
biggest
question.
statement in terms of business. That's the biggest statement.
Okay.
We have to move toward a net zero emissions. The first place to do that by the year 2035 is in energy production, by 2050 totally.
Corporate media portrayed Biden's statement as a gaffe, as opposed to noting the rising costs of Trump's denial as climate impacts accelerate. It was likely the first time that the public heard a national leader be honest about the scientific reality that we must phase out fossil fuels.
It wasn't a gaffe. He was telling the truth. Good for Joe Biden there. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So last week, we talked a little bit about the executive order that Trump signed. Remember when Republicans were against executive orders? Remember that? Yes. Yeah, back when it was just they were beating up at the black guy in the White House. Remember that? Yeah, those days. Evidently, no such problem now, especially if you're going to use those executive orders to attack working people and attack government. So great. 2 of their favorite things, attacking our government and attacking the people who work for it. This time, President Trump has this move towards making a large segment of our federal workforce at-will employees that can be fired anytime he wants, harkening us back to the good old days of patronage, when we could have loyal employees, loyal to someone like Trump, who are going to make things up and tell him what he wants to hear. I personally think it's a bad idea. I'm here to share some thoughts on the executive order and the fact that they're suing the administration. I've asked Richard Loeb to come talk with us. Richard is a senior policy counsel for the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE. Richard, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you so much, Rick.
So this executive order, I guess, real quiet. There wasn't a lot of news about this. Wasn't a big signing ceremony in the Rose Garden that I remember. But this is a pretty bad one.
Well, it was done. Actually, it was done last Wednesday night at around 8:00. So they were surely not trying to bring a lot of public attention to it. Done after hours, you might say. And
literally like thieves in the night.
Pretty close to that, yes.
So walk me through what it is.
Well, it's really a stunning executive order. It basically takes a portion of the career federal civil service. These are working people. These are not the highest levels of the civil service, but they're what you would call middle management for the most part positions. And these are people in many cases who've been with the government for many years, and it basically says, guess what? You used to have a position with due process protections, and you were rated on the quality of your work, and you could be disciplined, even fired if your work was not up to speed. Well, guess what? You are now effectively a political appointee, and you can be fired at will by whoever your boss is, and there's nothing you can do about it. And these are people who have already been in these positions in most cases, in fact, in all cases covered by the executive order, for some period of time. And, people are asking us, how many people are we talking about? Well, just to give you some context, the total number of political appointees in the executive branch, about 4,000 people, give or take, out of a total executive branch employment of about 2 million people.
Right.
This will probably turn tens of thousands. In fact, we estimate potentially 100,000 plus positions into political appointments.
Wow. So this could really take us back to the good old days of patronage, where you give some free work to the campaign, and you got a job until they get thrown out, and then you have these ideological swings. This ain't good for this. This isn't the way you run a lemonade stand. This just ain't it.
Well, everybody's focused right now on the provisions about removing people. Well, of course, as you just pointed out, the same provisions on removal also say they can hire whomever they want. There's no requirement for any kind of competition, no open postings of these jobs. Just whoever you want to hire, you can hire. They'd have to meet some minimal qualifications, but yeah, it's basically, as I told the New York Times, it's basically takes us back to 19th century patronage, and it is essentially a declaration of war on the career civil service. And it's these are ideas that were discarded about 140 years ago, and no democratic state, and I mean country, has a career civil service, professional civil service that's based upon this type of level of patronage. It's pretty much in line with keeping in line with what Trump's general and his administration's general views on bringing expertise to bear on problems.
Yeah. And the thing that gets me is, as I'm reading through this, I'm thinking about, who these people are. These are the folks who have taken government jobs that are paying probably far below what they could get in the private sector, but they're doing it because, one, public service is important. Two, there's some stability. And three, ultimately, I think, it comes down to, service to the future. If we do away with these people, if we got this kind of institutional knowledge, especially in a time of pandemic, when you're talking about adding scientists and doctors to this list, we're kind of in a really screwed position. And Joe Biden would most certainly be in a tough spot if elected January 20th, with all of the other crises going on, if Trump did go through and have a mass slaughter of, just kicking people out of our government.
Well, I mean, you pointed out nicely. So the way the executive order is currently structured, it goes after positions in what's called the competitive service, which is about 70% of all the jobs in the executive branch. These include positions at agencies such as EPA, Interior, the environmental agencies, Department of Labor, HUD, all of the Department of Defense, and many, many other agencies. You've obviously read about the disputes he's had with, or his appointees have had, with the career staff at EPA and Interior and so forth, just ignoring scientific advice or ignoring even the existence of the basic scientific principles. So, yeah, these were the people who would most likely be affected by the executive order and by the ability to just uproot these people and place them essentially into political appointments and be removed at will. And, of course, as I said a moment ago, You might, instead of having career people with many years of experience typically in these jobs with, pretty good qualifications, you could easily find yourself with people who come from oil companies or from the companies that, obviously are regulated or not very happy with many of the policies, including the basic underlying statutes, which they can't necessarily get repealed, but the regulation writing to undermine a lot of the statutory basis for the policies that we enjoy that relate to things like clean air and clean water, and you can just keep filling out in the blanks. This would affect the Department of Agriculture tremendously. And it may at some point be expanded to include some of the types of positions that you're mentioning. Right now, most of the medical positions are not covered because they're not in the competitive service, so that's sort of an anomaly that may be somewhat helpful. But I'm sure there are clever minds thinking, how do we get those positions possibly subject to these types of at-will type employment.
Right, but here's the thing. I think of a former coal mine owner leading the MSHA department to oversee the mines, going even further to where all of the inspectors are former mine foremen, and all of the people doing research on the effects of coal on miners and safe conditions, all being corporate shills. I kind of have a problem with that, and I guess you can go through agency after agency where you see, obviously it's headed up by, someone who ideologically is opposed to the work that they do, and then filling it with underlings who are as equally ideologically opposed to the operation. Horribly destructive and dangerous for us.
Well, I mean, that's what.
Or have I gone too far? Am I being too hyperbolic?
No, you haven't gone too far. That's what makes this executive order interesting. So it creates this new schedule of positions. The positions have not yet been defined. Each agency is supposed to have their initial list laid into the Office of Personnel Management, which is the government civil service agency, by a deadline of January 19th. I pointed out to people, hey, there's nothing that says they can't do it faster than that. It just says they should be in no later than January 19th, at least not the initial list. But the criteria they're using, this is the criteria. So these positions that they're looking at reviewing, that's why I say it could be tens of thousands and even really could even be hundreds of thousands. I don't know if they have enough time to convert all of them, but they include positions whose work relates to agency policies. That's the actual quote. Policies including regulations and guidance, or where the employee exercises discretion. So I don't even know what that means. Right. It's so broad.
It's like everybody except the guy sweeping the floor.
That. I'm sorry?
So basically everybody except the guy who sweeps the floor.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm not sure. It would depend because it says I don't want to get into all the details, but in some cases, employees who merely view or circulate agency policies to others could be covered. So that's clearly going after, clerical staff in some cases. I assume it would be clerical staff whom they don't like.
So basically, we're moving, and this is for my union brothers and sisters who think Donald Trump is their friend. And I've got a lot of union listeners who think, Donald Trump's doing great stuff for the union. Never mind what happened with Janice. Never mind all the NLRB decisions that have just been disastrous and horrible. Never mind the Walmart attorney who's the head of who's the Secretary of Labor. Never mind all of that. Forget all of that. You're basically making the entire federal workforce an at-will employment situation, which eventually then I got to assume is going to filter down to even the few unionized workers that are left in this country. So basically you're talking about the ultimate cancel culture right in front of us.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because just to stick it to us in the end, they have a provision towards the very end of the executive order that essentially encourages agency heads after their new political positions are approved to immediately petition something called the Federal Labor Relations Authority, which determines whether positions can be in a bargaining unit, in other words, be part of the union, to immediately petition them seeking clarification or classification whether they should properly remain in the bargaining unit, which is code words for they're out of the union to the extent they had a union contract.
Now, you guys, I guess, have joined the suit brought by the National Treasury Employees Union and I guess House Democrats as well, right?
Well, we have not joined that suit yet.
Okay.
We are reviewing various aspects of it. We are focusing right now on the election because I think maybe a week from now, under normal circumstances, might be a little longer, right? Given the circumstances we're facing, this problem could effectively be over. While it's true that Trump could spend the next, 2.5 months from the election doing a fair amount of damage, there's nothing President Biden and his team could not undo. There might be some people upset, but he could, under this executive order, simply reverse everything. He could fire all the people who might be hired as, these political hacks, and he could then restore. There's something called corrective actions, where he could restore anybody who was displaced or harmed by the EO. So right now, I think we're looking more at the political end of a fix. One of the concerns, and I'm speaking now for myself mostly, that I have with suits at this point, especially at such a critical juncture where we're looking at, possibly, some change administration momentarily, is putting things into this judiciary. That's not without some degree of risk.
No, good point.
Which, you never know what could happen if these cases get before a Trump-friendly court or Trump-friendly judges. I mean, as you pointed out, we've seen some pretty. So I was telling one of my colleagues, things that 10 years ago we would have, considered unthinkable are now, coming out as fairly standard decisions.
And that's what happens when you have ideologues on the court and not people who I look at some of the appointees that they've put into place. The one guy who never actually stepped foot into a courtroom, he's a judge.
Well, as I was telling a colleague just earlier today, we have a case pending for an appellate court where we're supporting a position taken by Scalia 30 years ago.
Wow.
And we think it's going to possibly go down. So, that's how much things have changed in the last few years in the judiciary. So I am cautious before taking cases before what I consider to be stacked courts.
That's an excellent point. And, on the executive order front, because, I'm thinking about Joe Biden. Hopefully people get out and vote. And at this point, if you haven't voted, don't put anything in a mailbox. Take it right to the election office, drop it off, or take it and surrender it and vote in person on Tuesday. Do not put it in the mailbox, people. But let's say Biden wins. Is there a possibility of one giant executive order we go, we're just going to undo everything that Trump did by executive order? Is that possible?
Well, I don't think that really be possible. It would be one massive executive order. I can assure you that people are collecting lists of EOs that need to be overturned. I know we have a small collection at AFGE right now of EOs that we want overturned, including some disastrous EOs issued in mid-2018 that were designed to go after federal employees and after the unions, which we'd like to see overturned on the first day if possible.
Right.
I'm sure there are many groups that have their own little list of EOs. It's usually cleaner. I don't want to get into the whole practice of how to overturn an EO, but it's usually cleaner to take each EO one at a time and repeal it.
Yeah, but I mean, there's just been so many. Because remember, Donald Trump was the guy, and a lot of these people who support him were the people who were, every time Obama would sign an executive order, were losing their ever-loving freaking minds. And this guy's done nothing but executive orders. And I would argue destructive ones. You could argue that Obama was trying to make things a little bit better. This guy's trying to tear things down and taking rights away from working people. It seems to be front and center. So last line of questioning I've got for you, because, I want my union audience to understand that this guy's not their friend. and these executive orders have been harmful to working people. Because you mentioned the 3 that came out a couple of years ago that hopefully will be overturned. That takes away representation and takes away seniority rights on a certain level. If you could explain those real quick, I'd appreciate it.
Well, I mean, he just finalized the rule on at least one of them about a month ago. Well, the 3 orders collectively basically just kicked the unions out. They literally kicked them off the premises to the extent we had small offices. They're kicked out. They restrict the use of something called official time, which is a concept that may be unique in the federal sector, but we don't have we have open shops. So, but yet we have an obligation under the statute to represent everyone who's in the bargaining unit. So, in return for representing everyone, even if they're not paying dues, we get something called official time. And official time means representation of employees on particular matters. It does not involve doing union business. Well, the Trump administration has basically said, sorry, we're basically taking away not all your official time, but like 90 or 95% of it. Oh, and by the way, don't forget, if you don't represent everybody in the bargaining unit, we'll seek to have you, decertified. So, they put us in an impossible situation, and they kicked us they physically kicked us out, cut off access to phone lines, told shop stewards that they had to seek permission from their bosses before they could engage in any representation of their colleagues. It was just terrible. It is just terrible. And then with respect to discipline and removal of federal employees, they did away with about 40 years of labor law. You no longer have to use progressive discipline. You no longer have to make sure that the penalties are roughly comparable for the same type of offenses. The Department of this was not directly affected by the executive orders, but at least at the Department of Veterans Affairs, they lowered the evidentiary standards that are applicable to discipline. Oh, and they said, by the way, no court or administrative agency can lessen the penalty selected by the agency. So let's say you're caught taking, a box of pencils home, and the agency proposes, and they can prove that you did it, and the agency proposes removal. Well, the reviewing authorities have no right under at least under their theories to lessen the penalty. So those EOs and the associated anti-union, anti-labor, sort of just anti-employee ideas are just percolating constantly throughout all the things that we see come out of the administration. And it's I'm only speaking on the federal employer end.
Right.
I mean, right now you mentioned Secretary Scalia at the Department of Labor. They're proposing now basically making the rules on who's an independent contractor as opposed to an employee much easier to classify employees as independent contractors. And I think hopefully you and your audience know that's not a good deal for working people in any way.
No, and that's why I think people need to hear that and need to understand that this administration has not been their friend, and this Supreme Court most certainly not going to be their friend. And as I've explained here on the air, I fear we're heading right back to the heart of the Lochner era, only we're going to call it the Amy.
Yes, we are. I couldn't agree. Yeah, I mean, I never thought I'd hear that in my lifetime, but I'm afraid you may be sadly right.
Well, I fear I might be. But Richard, I appreciate the time. I hope you'll come back again and share some more with us. Hopefully this all goes away and we move on in a better place.
I hope we tell happy stories next time.
There you go. Richard, I appreciate the time, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Richard Loeb, Senior Policy Counsel there for the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE. No, like I've been telling you, look, this administration has been horrible for working people, terrible for unions, and for all my union brothers and sisters who think that Trump is on their side, he's not at all. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1948. That was the day that a thick yellow fog rolled over the town of Donora, Pennsylvania, just south of Pittsburgh. Donora was a mill town, nestled in a valley on the banks of the Monongahela River. By 1948, the town had grown to 14,000 people who came to work in the town's steel mills and the Donora Zinc Works. For years, the...
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I'll tell you, I hate when I do that. Oops. Well, maybe we'll play that labor history another day. Accidentally hit the wrong button, and sometimes that happens. There it was. But anyway, as I was saying, the sad reality is you've got this administration that's just been top to bottom. Bad, bad, bad. Question. Are we dumber than vampire bats? Evidently we are. One of my listeners sent me an email with the story on evidently when vampire bats are sick, they social distance. They've figured it out. And I wonder if they had access to masks, if they would wear those too. It seems like we're the only animal on the planet dumb enough to go, no, I want to be stuck in like sardines next to a bunch of people breathing on me. Unlike the vampire bat. There you go. Some interesting news though today. There's a federal judge ruled that the Justice Department deciding that they were going to take over for Trump and name the federal government as the defendant and not Trump in the E. Jean Carroll suit. Because, of course, when I always think of the federal government stepping in and defending someone for defamation over a rape allegation. I always think of our government coming to their defense and not being the ones actually prosecuting the allegation. But hey, we live in strange times. But fortunately, our court, federal judge, in the federal district court in Manhattan, threw that out. Said nope, you can't defend Donald Trump. Sorry, not going to happen. I guess what this means is that for now, the lawsuit brought by E. Jean Carroll will move forward against Donald Trump, and it will move forward as if he is a private citizen, not the president. And look, very soon he will be, if you get that vote in, he will be that private citizen who then can be sued and hopefully then can be perp walked, given a nice shiny set of bracelets, a beautiful, well-fitting orange suit to match the skin, and taken away. Because I am seriously hoping for some perp walks and some jail time. I think that would be something quite helpful. Because at the end of the day, what we find out, evidently from the public records obtained by the Washington Post, they had a story today that evidently the U.S. government and Trump's supporters have paid in excess of $8 million to Trump properties during his presidency. So he's making money off of his properties. And in fact, it was interesting that they pointed out during a summit with Shinzo Abe at Mar-a-Lago that Mar-a-Lago charged the Trump aides $2,600 a night. And you go, what? Also, when he met China's Xi Jinping, charged government in something like almost, I think it was like $7,500, almost $8,000 for dinner. And I'm going, I sure hope that came with like dessert. $8,000. But this is one of those things where you go, you knew this was going to happen. We talked about it in 15 and 16. You knew he was going to be the huckster that he is. And he has profited off of being in office. And one of the things I love hearing from my Trump supporter friends, well, he's not making it. He's losing money. He donates his money back. Yeah, evidently, he does give the $400,000 back, but let's think about it this way: $400,000 a year, $400,000 a year, $400,000 a year. What's that? $1.6 million. He's made over $8 million off of hawking the office. He's making money, and I guarantee he's got a back end on the merchandising. I hope some industrious reporter finds that. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening